Out on the edge of Dakota Territory, where the land stretched wider than most folks' hearts could hold, there arrived a woman with a suitcase light as air and a belly full of hope. Her name was Marjorie. 50 winters behind her, a dozen betrayals tucked inside every wrinkle. And still, she believed in love. She had answered a mail-order ad not because she was desperate, though many would call her that, but because somewhere deep inside she still believed that kindness had a name, that maybe, just maybe, someone might want her not in spite of her body or her age, but because of the warmth she carried, the stories, the patience, the steadiness that only time could teach. But when the train hissed into the station, when she stepped off with a bonnet pinned too carefully and a heart beating too loud, there was no man with a rose, no smile waiting just for her, only laughter. Cruel, cruel as prairie wind in February, because the ad was a prank, a cruel joke cooked up by boys too bored and too young to know what a woman like her had already survived. They laughed at her belly, at the hope in her eyes, at the way she stood still, dignified even as her dreams crumbled like biscuit crust. But someone else was watching from the end of the platform, not a young man, not a rich one, but a widower named Jonas Callan, whose grief had left his world gray for 3 years. Until now. He saw something they didn't, and as he stepped forward, silent as snow, something shifted in the wind. Not all rescues come with gunfire. Some come with steady hands, warm coffee, and the simple words, "You don't need to leave. You can come home with me." What happened next? Well, it's the kind of story folks in Widow's Hollow still whisper about when the stove crackles and the wind begins to hum. Marjorie Ellis had never been a delicate woman, not in build nor in heart. At 51, she had grown used to the way folks' eyes flickered when she stepped into a room not with admiration, but with that quiet judgment reserved for women who dared to take up space in both body and voice. She hadn't meant to answer the ad. Her cousin Ruth had circled it in a newspaper, left it folded open on the kitchen table like a dare. Mail-order brides wanted homestead-ready, sturdy temperament preferred, room board and companionship provided. It was the word sturdy that had struck a chord, a bitter one, like someone had seen her through the paper and whispered, "You're not too much. You're just enough for someone who sees things clearly." But Marjorie didn't know the ad was never meant to be real. Not for her, at least. It was part of a cruel joke set in motion by two farmhands in Dry Creek boys who never grew into men who drank too much and laughed too loud. They'd sent for her using a fake name just to see who'd show up. And she had. She'd sewn her best dress, packed a canvas bag with a single book of hymns, a picture of her late mother, and a hand-me-down ribbon from her girlhood that still smelled faintly of lilac. That bag, small and wrinkled, became a source of mockery the moment she stepped off the train. She didn't even bring a dowry, one of the men jeered, slapping his thigh with laughter. And look at the size of her. We'll need 2 horses just to pull the wedding wagon. Their cruelty wasn't even disguised. Marjorie didn't weep. Not then. Not there. She stood by the depot, hands folded neatly over her belly, the same belly they mocked, and waited. Waited for someone to tell her what came next, because she'd given up her room at the boarding house, sold her sewing machine, and bet her future on the kindness of strangers. Foolish, perhaps, but not wrong. Hope is never wrong. And just as the sun began to fall behind the canyon line, turning the dirt a dark kind of gold, a quiet voice cut through the shame. "Is this how we treat a guest in our land?" The voice came from a man with a coat too big and a limp too old. He didn't laugh. He didn't gawk. He just stepped forward and looked her in the eye. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat, "my name is Jonas Callan, and if you're needing a ride or something more permanent, I have space. On the wagon and at my table." He didn't touch her. He didn't rush her. He simply offered a place where she wouldn't be mocked. And for the first time in many years, Marjorie felt what dignity looked like from the outside in. He didn't say she was beautiful. He said she deserved better. And that was enough to make her heart remember how to beat. The ride from the station to Jonas Callan's homestead was quiet, almost too quiet. Not the uncomfortable kind, though. It was the silence of two people who had nothing left to prove and too much past to unpack. The kind of quiet that felt oddly respectful. Marjorie Ellis sat beside him in the wagon, her gloved hands resting atop her travel bag. The mocking laughter from the station still echoed in her ears, But the steady rhythm of wagon wheels and Jonas's slow, deliberate driving helped soften the sting. She studied his face in profile, creased from sun and sorrow. He didn't fill space with chatter the way lonely men sometimes do. He offered her no compliments, no platitudes, no questions about where she'd come from or why she came alone. He simply said, "It's a long way home. Hope you don't mind the quiet." She didn't. She welcomed it. When they arrived at the homestead, Marjorie expected to be offered a cot in the barn or maybe a spare corner in the woodshed. Instead, Jonas led her to the front porch and opened the door to a modest but warm home, pine wood floors, a stone hearth, and the smell of something faintly herbal lingering in the air. "My wife used to dry mint on the rafters," he said plainly, not as a warning, but as a memory that still lived in the walls. "You can have the guest room. It's clean. No expectations." He didn't flinch at her figure, didn't look away when she loosened her corset with a quiet sigh. He simply said, "You look tired. You're welcome to rest as long as you need." Marjorie nodded, unsure whether to cry or to bless him. She spent the night staring at the ceiling, not from fear but from disbelief. No one had ever given her space without asking for something in return. She listened to the wind tapping the shutters and to the soft creak of Jonas pacing the floor, once then twice. Morning came with birdsong and the smell of coffee. She emerged from the guest room, unsure whether she was still welcome. But there it was again, that same quiet hospitality. A plate on the table, a folded napkin, a seat. "Figured we'd start with eggs," he said. "If you like yours runny, I'll try to learn." He didn't ask why she came. He asked how she liked her eggs. Sometimes the first sign of love isn't a kiss or a poem. It's a plate already set at the table, and someone remembering how you take your coffee. By the third morning, Marjorie Ellis began to suspect she wasn't just a guest, she was a presence. Not yet a fixture, but no longer invisible. She folded laundry that wasn't hers, picked mint from the side of the house, sewed a button back onto Jonas Callan's work shirt, even though he hadn't asked. None of it was owed and none of it was praised. And yet, it mattered, because it made her feel part of something again. But with that comfort came the tug of unease. Every time Marjorie walked into a room, she sensed another woman's shadow just ahead of her. The late wife Edith, whose quiet grace seemed stitched into the curtains, the tablecloth, the softness in Jonas's eyes when he stirred the stew without speaking. Her portrait sat above the mantel's sepia tone, serene, thin-lipped, and fine-boned. Everything Marjorie was not. One evening, Jonas found her staring at that portrait too long. "She wasn't perfect, you know," he said, setting down a bundle of firewood. "She'd hum off key, always burned the biscuits, hated the cold but loved winter dresses." Marjorie smiled faintly. "She looks like the kind of woman men stay loyal to." "She was," Jonas answered. "But loyalty doesn't mean you stop living when someone leaves. It just means you carry them and keep your hands open for what comes next." That night, Marjorie sat by the window with a shawl over her shoulders. Her heart warred between retreat and rise. She was not used to being seen, let alone accepted in her full shape and silence. Part of her wanted to pack her bags, slip out before dawn, save him from the whispers and herself from more heartache. But she stayed, because something about this house, its stillness, its steady warmth, was teaching her that love needn't arrive in grand declarations. Sometimes it crept in like sunrise through thin curtains, soft and slow, yet unstoppable. Still, the ache in her chest whispered, "What if this is all a kindness he will one day withdraw? What if you're still just a burden wrapped in gratitude?" Sometimes healing feels more dangerous than heartbreak, especially when you're not sure if you're welcome or just passing through. The wind changed that week. Cold swept in early from the canyon, stirring the wheat and waves outside the cabin, and stirring something inside Marjorie Ellis, too. She no longer flinched when she passed the mirror. She no longer apologized when her steps creaked the floorboards. And one quiet morning, as she sat on the back porch, peeling apples, Jonas Callan stepped out beside her, not to pass by, but to sit. Neither spoke for some time. Just the sound of skin and blade peel curling to the ground, like a ribbon of red and gold. Then he said it plain as day. "You move through this place like you belong." Marjorie paused. Her hands didn't stop, but her breath did. "I haven't belonged anywhere since I was 17. She said, the words tasting foreign but true. "I was traded for land once. then left behind for being too much. Our too much body, too much hope, too much softness. Jonas nodded slowly. Edith was like river stone, cool and still. You? You're like spring rain, gentle, sure, and you make things grow whether you mean to or not. A silence passed between them, thick with the weight of a truth newly born. And in that pause, Marjorie did not shrink. She did not hide. She sat taller, the soft flesh of her arms dappled with sunlight, the wind tangling her graying hair. She had feared being too much her whole life, but in that moment Jonas looked at her like she was exactly enough. That night she baked biscuits, not to replace Edith, but to offer something of her own. Hers were clumsy, cracked on the sides with too much butter and not enough salt. But Jonas ate 4 in silence, then said, "You put your whole heart in them. I could taste it." Marjorie chuckled. "That's probably why they fell apart." "No," he said, placing one warm hand over hers. "That's why they held together." Sometimes freedom doesn't come from running, but from finally being still and seen and safe. The snow came early that year. By late October, a white hush lay heavy on the field, softening the world. And in that hush, something between Marjorie Ellis and Jonas Callan began to unfold, not in sudden sparks, but in small, daily gestures. A second cup of coffee poured, before being asked, a shawl draped silently over the other's shoulders, before the fire died down. It was in that quiet rhythm that truth began to rise. One afternoon, while clearing out the barn, Marjorie found an old box tucked behind a stack of rusted plows. Dusty, lace-yellowing letters and a photograph, faded but tender, of a young woman cradling a baby. Edith. And tucked beneath it, a tiny pair of knitted booties never worn. She set the box down gently. When Jonas came in and saw her there, he stopped cold. "You weren't supposed to see that." Marjorie looked up, eyes soft, voice steady. "You don't have to explain. But if you want to, I'll listen." He sat beside her on the wooden bench, the weight of years sitting between them. "She was due in spring," he whispered. "But the fever came in winter. Took them both. I buried her with our daughter still inside." Marjorie didn't speak. She reached for his hand, rough-scarred and trembling. "I wasn't just grieving a wife," he continued. "I was grieving the father I never got to be. That's why I shut this place down. That's why I shut me down." She nodded. "I've carried ghosts too, Jonas. Just, different ones. A young girl traded for cattle. A woman mocked for wanting too much. A dream mailed out to the west and laughed off the train. But you're still standing," he said. She smiled, gentle and deep. "And you're still here to see it." He leaned in forehead, touching hers, not in passion, but in recognition. Not everything needed to be rebuilt. Some things simply needed to be held together in the open. Sometimes the heaviest burdens we carry are the ones we never speak aloud until someone gently helps us lift them. By late November, word had spread down the dusty roads of Widow's Hollow that Jonas Callan, the quiet widower who hadn't spoken at a town gathering in over 5 years, had taken in a woman. Not just a woman, but Marjorie Ellis, the mail-order bride. Folks claimed had been passed around like cheap whiskey and finally abandoned because of her size and silence. The whispers came in waves, at the dry goods store, at church pews, even through cracks in barn doors. "She's just using him. She showed up with nothing but a belly and a book of lies. Poor Jonas. Doesn't know better." The worst came one Sunday morning, as Marjorie walked to the small white chapel with Jonas, heads turned. Some nodded politely, but others didn't bother to hide their sneers. Then came Elda Cranston, a woman who wore her judgment like perfume. She stepped right in front of Marjorie, voice sweet as vinegar. "So this is the woman that brought our good Jonas back from the dead." Marjorie stopped. She didn't flinch. She didn't lower her gaze. "I'm not here to replace anyone, Mrs. Cranston. I'm just here to build something honest." Elda's eyes narrowed. "With what dreams and soft words," no, Marjorie said. "With my hands. With bread I bake. With tears I have already wept. And with love I don't take lightly." The silence that followed was sharp. Behind her, Jonas stepped forward. His voice, quiet but firm, broke through the cold. "Elda," he said, "you were my wife's friend. I buried Edith with my own hands. But this woman beside me didn't come here to replace her. She came to see me. Really see me. Something no one else bothered to do after the funeral." He turned to the crowd, eyes steady. You can talk all you want, but your voices won't echo in my home anymore." He reached for Marjorie's hand. "This is the woman I choose. And if that costs me your approval, so be it." The chapel doors creaked open. He nodded toward the entrance. Together they walked in, side by side, unapologetic. Sometimes the kindest kind of strength is the one that stands up quietly even when every eye tries to shame it. Winter came to Widow's Hollow, not with thunder, but with a hush. Snow drifted down like sifted flour, blanketing the rooftops in soft silence. The wind whispered no longer with suspicion, but with something closer to awe. Inside the cabin on the ridge, warmth glowed not just from the hearth, but from something deeper, something lived in. Marjorie Ellis once laughed at, for the way she filled out a dress or for the way she spoke with careful pauses, now moved through her days like a song settling into its final note. She rose early. She kneaded bread with slow hands and cinnamon. She read aloud to Jonas on the porch, her voice wrapping around the wind like yarn. But it wasn't just the domestic rhythm that made their home feel full. It was the way Jonas Callan looked at her, not with pity or surprise, but with quiet reverence. One evening, as the light bled gold across the fields, he took her hand and said, "You know they once told me healing would come like thunder, but you came like morning, just steady." She smiled, not the nervous kind she used to wear in front of judgment, but the sort born from being seen entirely. They married without spectacle. No guests, no lace, just snow a stitched quilt and a promise spoken slowly. And when the first calf was born that spring, Marjorie named her Mercy. Because sometimes life does not repay us in gold or grandeur, but in softness, in second chances, in being chosen freely. And for anyone listening who's ever felt too big, too old, too strange, or too forgotten, may you remember this. The right heart will never mock your hope. It will hold it. Sometimes love doesn't arrive on time. Sometimes it stumbles in after the doors have all closed, after the world has said, "You're too much," or "not enough." But Marjorie, a woman once mocked for her figure, her hope, her age, found that love didn't need fanfare or youth. It just needed someone like Jonas, a man with quiet eyes and calloused hands who looked at her not with pity, but recognition. Together they didn't chase passion like firecrackers in July. They built something slower, sturdier, like warm bread rising, like a porch swing creaking under two hearts that had known sorrow and still chose softness. Their story reminds us it is never too late to be seen with new eyes, never too late to build a home not just of timber and stone, but of shared silence and chosen kindness. And maybe if you've ever felt overlooked, if you've ever carried dreams in a heart others called too much, then this story belongs to you too. If this tale stirred something gentle in you, we invite you to subscribe to None, Wild West Saga, where stories like Marjorie's write again. Leave a comment below. Would you like to see more tales of women who were once cast aside but found a love that stayed? And please share this with someone who still believes love might just come, quietly but surely. Would you like to hear the next story?